So I'm going to talk about the technical response. And this is going to be basically using the IT preparation pieces that we've put in place to provide a response step by step. So in the technical response, we have really 6 items here, but there are 5 main items that my team would be responsible for. And that's detection, validation, eradication, recovery. And I think I missed one, containment. And in between those, you'll see that there's a 6, which is the incident response lead, which is where we're jumping off to talk to them and notify them of what we found. Detection is the initial detection of the security event. Now, notice I'm using very specific language there. That is security event, not incident. Validation is going through the event, figuring out if it's true positive, and trying to understand, at least get an initial understanding of the impact that it's having on the environment. At this point, we'll reach out to the incident response lead, we'll give them this information, allowing them to determine if this violates CIA within their organization and who they need to reach out to. Usually they'll follow up with counsel shortly after to get a understanding of where they should go from there. Following that, we're going to work on containment. Well, containment is the containment of the threat. That's going to be setting up a barrier to ensure that nobody else can get in, that we have no other threats that are spreading throughout the environment, and containing that damage. Eradication is the removal of a threat. That could be the removal of tooling, accounts, or compromised entry points. And then we have finally recovery, which is the restoration of services and workflows for the business, taking into account that other systems could have been compromised and doing it with caution in order to ensure that the restoration of assets are not currently compromised as well. And we're going to see that here in just a second, where I walk through a couple of cases and describe why. I'd like to give you some examples, and here's exactly what they look like. So in case 1, we have a healthcare company, and we start off with detection. Well, we did not detect this particular event. It was detected by the users themselves. They had some odd emails that were coming through, and that currently they didn't have missing, or they had missing tooling, so they couldn't detect it on there. We couldn't detect it for them. Validation, well, myself and some technicians began an investigation revealing that this was not the first time this was affected, or this was not the first user that was affected. We pulled some login records for all users that were affected within the environment, or every single user that exists within the environment, and narrowed it down to about 9 to 10 users. Once we had them, we started pulling through information and timelines to tell us when the last, or when the exact first moment occurred that we see this particular login. Um, then we tracked down that user's email, we did a trace, and we found that phishing emails were coming in at the very first time about 4 days earlier than what they had described to us in the initial detection. Well, we then realized that the session for these accounts had been phished from this user and all the other users, and used to set up persistence through what's known as a session replay. Once we had figured out that a session replay had been created, we had to dig through some additional logging, and we found that an app had been designed to download the user's email and create persistence within the environment. We were certain that this was an active threat. So we reached out to the incident response lead, or at least our POC at the time, and we explained to them the situation. And then at the same time, we began containment. And the reason we took steps for containment was to ensure that no further action could be taken by this threat actor and no further loss could occur. And in containment, we blocked the IPs of that user through conditional access and reset all of the affected users' passwords, and then set in place a plan to reset all passwords and revoke all access for current users within the environment, because we could not trust the environment. Once that was locked down, we removed the ability to consent for any kind of enterprise apps, since this was what was being used for persistence. Then we monitored the connections attempts and confirmed that no further attempts were successful. All we saw was unsuccessful attempts by the threat actor. Eradication was the removal of all the apps. This was happening simultaneously once we had begun the containment, and pulling of all phishing emails from the users' mailboxes. Recovery was ensuring that these users had access to whatever they needed to continue working again. And we'll move on to the second case. The second case is a little different. And the importance here between the two cases, something that we need to take away from this, is an incident response plan would allow the company to say, this is what needs to happen from this point forward. But each event's going to be different. It's going to provide a different level of severity. It's going to provide a different level of, I would say, shock factor, really. And in this particular, in the manufacturing case, we have detection, which came through a down detector that we have for the customer. The down detector told us that late at night, one machine went down, and then early in the morning, all the following machines went down. Now, this is every single server within the environment was now down. Further investigation onto their VMware hosts inside of detection, well, sorry, excuse me, inside of validation allowed us to actually dig through just the VMware host, in which we found a README that said, hey, every single server is encrypted, and you need to pay us money in order to get access to these servers again. Well, we don't negotiate with terrorists here, so we end up ensuring that we have the immutable backups in place to provide access back to the company. However, we don't really have enough information to go off of when this occurred. Containment is really just going to be a matter of us making sure nothing has access to the environment but us through very secured channels. We don't have a way to tell where it came from. Luckily, while we were doing this, we were working with the POC to explain to them that, hey, yeah, your business is down, which we had to tell them right away. And I'm sure they had no issue figuring that out since they could not work. We found that a child company had actually caused the initial infection through an outside connection. We had disabled that connection in our initial validation. Following through with that, we worked to coordinate with them some additional timelines to actually figure out if our hypothesis was correct. We confirmed that they did have access through a P2P VPN. So we systematically had to do what I'm going to collectively call an eradication and recovery all at the same time, which is we remove the accounts that we believe are being used for this malicious threat, as well as recovering all of the servers that we need at the exact same time. And we had to do this in virtual in order to bring these up so they can eventually work. It's worth noting that this took an extremely large amount of effort on our end, as well as the business's end, and money that they were losing daily because they could not get access to their environment. This is just one aspect. If we had built out another way or failover for them to have their stuff up instantly in one location, if we had better logging, that when we knew that there were specific timelines that they came in and decided to start encrypting everything, or a suspicious location login, that would have helped us a lot more. It's worth noting also that at this time the business had not contacted counsel or the insurer, and at this point 2 weeks has gone by. 2 weeks of downtime. So we're seeing dramatic loss. Maximum downtime or tolerable downtime had been exceeded by at least 3 days, and the pain point was growing day by day. And this is the kind of interaction you see with businesses where if they don't have insurance, they don't have counsel backing them up, you see businesses fail from this. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and move on to the business response with Mike.
Thanks, Seth. So on the business response front, it's important to recognize that there is not just one linear axis or one linear axis that we function on in responding to an incident. The technical response is critical, but it's not the only response. We also need to make sure that there is an appropriate business response. So while the technical response is making sure that you're getting the network back up and running, the business response is also critically important because it's making sure that you're able to get back to business as usual, or at least have a continuity of operations such that you can continue functioning despite the fact that you're fighting an ongoing incident. The first aspect of a business response and an effective business response is to bring in your leadership. Your leadership has to understand that incidents occur. Just in general, incidents are part of operating in a technical environment. Make sure that your leadership understands that not only do they occur, but that you have a process to manage to handle it, and that you've mitigated risk as best you can, and now you're fighting through the incident. The other aspect of this, and I touched on this a little bit with the continuity of operations, but part of making sure that your leadership is well informed and is able to keep a cool head about them as we move through this incident is making sure that you have a business continuity plan. it really isn't just enough to have that incident response plan, but it's how is your business going to continue to operate if certain systems go down? And now Seth talked a little bit about being well beyond that acceptable downtime. How would your company operate if you exceed that acceptable downtime? Do you have a backup plan in place? Is there a way for to utilize alternate communications? Do you have a plan to communicate with your customers, with your partners, with your vendors? To be able to coordinate across all functions, both within your organization and outside of your organization, ensures that continuity of operations. It also ensures that the affected systems and users have the ability to work from a backup operating plan to really minimize that downtime. The final aspect of this business response is being able to return to normal operations. Normal operations may look a little bit different after the incident than they did before the incident. It may also take quite a while to return to those normal operations. So the question becomes, how quickly can you get back to normal operations in light of the incident as you move through that continuity of operations or move through your business continuity plan? This is something that doesn't just happen. It's something that you need to practice and work through tabletop exercises and other types of exercises where you're drilling your incident response plan and you're drilling the personnel within your organization, training them so that they have an understanding of what they're supposed to do in the event of an incident. And the third prong of this right of boom response is the incident response. So we've got the technical response where it's your IT team working through the incident, making sure that they are safeguarding and securing your network. We've got the business response where we're making sure that you can continue operations. And then we get to the incident response. And critical to the incident response is the breach coach. That's the attorney that you're bringing in because, again, that attorney serves as that quarterback that's going to lead the incident and make sure that every step that it's taken is in compliance with statute, in compliance with regulation, and putting you in a defensible position on the back end of the incident. The incident response team, external and internal, really focuses on identifying what the root cause was of the incident, ensuring that we have the proper backups from a last trusted time period, working with insurance, working with e-discovery to determine what the overall scope of the incident was, the scope of the breach, the types of data that was impacted, which leads to what notifications have to be done to which regulators, to which individuals, and to which state attorneys general, and then the after action. And the after action really is critical as well because this is where we learn, this is where we get better. So within the incident response framework, the breach coach is not just a lawyer. A breach coach is an attorney that specializes in cybersecurity and data breaches, and their expertise is really vital in effectively navigating the legal and procedural complexities of an incident. So the role of the breach coach, it's to review contractual and regulatory requirements, making sure that the requirements that are specific to your organization are being met and you're fully aware of all of those obligations. Drafting and reviewing communications, making sure that that crisis communication, those company notifications that go out to customers, to stakeholders, to shareholders, that those communications are done in such a way that's not going to increase any sort of liability. They have to be clear and accurate. They have to make sure that they're complying with different regulatory regimes and different requirements. Then the coordination with law enforcement. There have been multiple instances where we've been working cases and we have done the traditional law enforcement notification to the FBI, to the Secret Service, in some cases to the Department of State, where those law enforcement entities come back and they've been able to provide a decryptor, which has opened up the network and made it so a client doesn't have to pay the ransom. I've had it where the FBI has done direct coordination with foreign law enforcement that has been able to freeze cloud instances and secure the data and safeguard the data in those foreign cloud instances that the threat actor was exporting the data to. These types of authorities, these types of capabilities, they're only resident within law enforcement. And so not something to be afraid of, but it needs to be coordinated effectively. And the type of information that's being shared, once it's shared with law enforcement, generally loses that privilege. So the attorney very much needs to ensure that the information that's being shared is something that is acceptable if it were to be discoverable later. And then it's communicate with customers and stakeholders, making sure that you have a good plan to dampen down any of the effects of the incident and that you're communicating effectively across all of the stakeholders, across those within and outside of your organization to manage your reputation and to provide assurances to customers so that they don't leave as a result of this incident. And then the final piece is working with digital forensics and the incident response team. The breach coach works really closely with digital forensics. And this is why it's important to have an attorney that specializes in cybersecurity incidents. Understanding the technical aspect of it and driving forensics is really important because there are some instances where you don't want to know root cause. There are some instances where if you identify what the root cause is, it may give rise to a claim of negligence. And in that case, it's better not to have that information. But knowing when to direct an incident response team to stop looking or when to direct an incident response team to dig deeper is something that an attorney who has a good understanding of forensics and a good understanding of cybersecurity can provide. So the breach coach plays a really pivotal role in incident response and acts as that quarterback, ensuring that all aspects of the response are cohesive, compliant, and effective. The next aspect, and I touched on this a little bit, but DFIR, so digital forensics and incident response. The primary objective of DFIR is to uncover the full scope of the incident. And this involves identifying how the incident occurred, if directed by the breach coach, determining the extent of the breach, which is critically important to understanding what the notification process is, because you need to understand what the data is, and then understand the impact on the organization's systems or data. Insurance is another critical piece, which I'll turn over to Gray to touch on.
Thank you very much. I think the key thing to recognize here as an observation is, you know, this makes the expectation and assumption that we have done the proper preparation, gotten the insurance, built into this incident response plan properly, and so that we're not waiting on an insurance company to tell us what to do next. Rather, we're getting the breach coach, the DFIR involved, and then we can work with the insurance companies to make sure we're getting proper claim filing notice, coordinating the interaction with our service providers and other vendors. And then one of the advantages here, handling it properly this way is most of the policies that are structured today are on a pay on behalf of form. So if we've done the proper homework and pre-work with regards to setting this plan up, we don't, as an insured, we don't have to have the cash outlay to pay for these bills and then expect to wait for reimbursement. The insurance company will actually pay on behalf of for the approved bills and on a more timely manner.
Which leads us to e-discovery. E-discovery is an important part of understanding what the full scope of the data breach is. And now at this point, we shift from the term incident to breach, because once data is compromised, it's considered breached, and it's subject to various laws and regulations. The different types of data that we're really looking for in e-discovery process are PII, PHI, payment card information, if you're working with the DoD or with the federal government, controlled unclassified information, and then certainly intellectual property. All of these different types of information are going to determine how you respond to an incident. Because if you understand that you have trade secrets that are part of a data set that were compromised, you may be willing to pay to have that data or to protect that information and make sure it doesn't get leaked on the dark web. Similarly, with PHI or PII, you want to limit exposure, limit information being leaked that could be sensitive to individuals. This part of the incident response process is generally one of the more expensive. Depending on the amount of data, it can range from anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 all the way up to $500,000 just to do the e-discovery. And so understanding this process, understanding the scope of it, and understanding the potential costs are also really important. And then we get to the notification process. There are, from an incident response perspective, there are 50 different breach notification laws for each state, as well as two, one for DC, one for Puerto Rico. All of these cover individual notifications, and in general, it comprises any information that contains first name or first initial and last name in conjunction with social security number, driver's license number, information that would give access to a financial account, username and password to email account or any other type of account, medical or health information, and in 2 states, it's also date of birth. But that data, if that is in a data set, needs to go or needs to be reported to those individuals under the state notification law. And importantly, it's not where your organization is as to which law applies, it's where those individuals are a resident at the time of the breach. It also is important that those notification laws depending on which state they are, varies widely as to whether or not you need to notify the Attorney General. For instance, in North Carolina, a single individual or a single resident of the state of North Carolina being involved in a data breach obligates you to notify the state Attorney General. Other states have a minimum threshold of 500 or 1,000, but it's important to understand where those states are and where the data subjects in the breach are residents. And then there's the regulatory compliance. If you're in a specialized or highly regulated industry, you generally are understanding or aware of the different requirements you have. Importantly, though, if you're in critical infrastructure, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, which passed in 2021 and is in the rulemaking process right now, is going to apply very broadly across all critical infrastructure sectors. The vast majority of organizations in this country are considered critical infrastructure, so it's important also to understand what your reporting requirements are under CERCIA. And then there are media notifications that are required under various regulations, which put the breach out and make sure that the data breach or the data subjects are aware. It also opens you up to liability. And so knowing what needs to go in those media notifications, when and where they need to go out, is critically important from a notification process. And then finally, we get to the after action items. And these are the lessons learned. So once everything is done, we do a hot wash and we go through and we say, from a legal perspective, what do we do well? What do we now know that is in our that we're required to do? Same with technical, insurance, and business. What do we need to do better? What do we need to put in place? What are the either technical, procedural, or personnel changes that need to be made to ensure that we are able to identify and mitigate any breach that occurs in the future? From a legal perspective, class action mitigation is critical. It used to be if you have 100,000 people in your data set or that have been compromised as part of an incident, that's the threshold for class action liability. That's where plaintiffs' firms see really being able to make money on those types of cases. I have 2 ongoing class action cases right now, one in the 2,000 individual range, one in the 3,000 individual range. Almost immediately, class action suits were filed as soon as the notifications went out. The threshold or the floor for class action liability has gone down significantly, and you can almost guarantee if you suffer from an incident that you have to notify, you're going to have a class action lawsuit filed against you. How do you mitigate that? How do you put yourself in a defensible position is really important. Turn this over to Seth for the technical response.
So I would clarify that the after action for technical is more of a what did you learn from this experience, especially if you don't have an incident response plan. And hopefully you learned a lot so that way you can make the changes that are necessary. Typically, what I see is a huge correction from people who don't have incident response, filling of gaps that they perceived were there, as well as the gaps that were actually there. Purchasing a lot more technical, mostly technical, mostly big dollar spends, things that they can actually correct right away. But this is going to be, on the whole, how are you going to avoid this in the future? What are you learning from that? And the technical aspect should give you not only just tooling, but should give you NIST governance pieces that you need to address and policies that should be in place. And with that, we can move up to the insurance, I believe.
And so a couple of comments here with regards to, again, stepping back, taking a big picture look. The after action review from an insurance perspective, I think, can be looked at in multiple phases of this process. After we've put the initial plan in place and we've done tabletop exercises, we may tweak what we've got. Certainly seeing other claim scenarios along the way, we can confirm what coverage we may need to negotiate at a subsequent renewal. But in the event of going through this entire process because we've had a claim, the biggest message is, for the next renewal, we most likely will be facing some changes with regards to the insurance program. The best way we can help defend against that and combat that on the front end is making sure that the underwriting community understands that we know what happened, we took action to avoid it happening again, and in many cases we might even share large elements of the incident response plan, with the underwriting community to help them in the underwriting process look at your particular risk as a better risk than it used to be, pre-incident or pre-breach. Lastly, from a severity perspective, if we don't do anything, and we just continue operating as forward, it's very possible that we may face a number of declinations and be very challenged to even find insurance or have non-renewals. And then I think the last piece we have here, I'll pass it back to the business response.
The final piece of the after action is the business. And how do you manage post incident? And in a lot of cases, companies look at an incident as a black eye, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. The way that you couch the information, the way that you share information with your constituents, with your stakeholders, with your customers, can largely determine how you rebound from the incident from a business perspective. Reputation management is important. Whether or not you do a press release is a business decision, but one that can show transparency. Whether or not you include regular updates to your customers on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis as you're going through the incident can help to mitigate some of the potential harm from a business perspective, and also helps to inure trust in those individuals or in those organizations. Reviewing your business response plan helps to reduce downtime and disruption from future incidents. So as an after action, you're going to want to look at what did you do well from a reputation perspective? What did you do well from a business response perspective and continuity of operations? And how can you improve? And then finally, reviewing that incident response plan. It's a living framework. It's a living document. Make sure that you're addressing gaps, not just from the technical perspective, not just from the response perspective, but also from the business perspective. Do you have the right people on your incident response team? Are you informing the right stakeholders within and outside of your organization? All of these gaps need to be addressed in order to have an effective after action to make sure that you can continue building, you can continue to respond well to these types of incidents, which are going to continue to occur.